Right, how y'all doing? Long story short, then a little rant. Little rant's probably never going to be little for me, right? I love VR, but I'm not a huge fan of VR content creators. You don't need the biggest and best headset to get into VR. What you need will entirely depend on what it is you want out of VR. But at this point, after my little experience last night in VR, I think base station tracked is on its way out unless you go for a very specific setup. Oh man. Okay. I had so much fun getting back into VR last night. Base station tracked headset, full body motion trackers all set up in there. Base station's all angled and great, okay? I have multiple headsets. I know what I like, okay? I got into VR a few years back when one of my mates gave me a VR headset. He gave me a CV1. Rift CV1, the first consumer version 1 Oculus Rift headset, right? 2 little base stations, and you'd have to set them up and calibrate your play space, and you're good to go, right? Your controllers are base station tracked, your headset's base station tracked, great. Then you had like the Vive, the HTC Vive. That was a really nice headset, right? The Rift was a great headset with 2 problems, at least for me. One, I didn't like that as soon as one of those sensors was moved, you had to recalibrate everything. And for me, those sensors got moved a lot. I was running VR back in the day on a laptop, which worked great, by the way, for a lot of early VR experiences, because the headsets were lower resolution back then, which then leads into the second problem. Screen resolution was like really low, and in some cases it was kind of difficult to read. Very nice display, but you could count the pixels on it. Then I was like, I don't want to have to deal with base stations anymore. Base stations get on my tits. Because like I said, every time you move a base station, you have to recalibrate your play area. And well, my play area would shift all the time. So it's just like, oh, this is so annoying, because I've only got a small house, and I've got a wife and children and a doggle, and if anything gets knocked, then ah! And it's a beef that ties into yesterday about base station tracked is that if anything goes out of range or out of view of a base station, your tracking goes in the bin. So all of a sudden you go, huh, and your hand goes, whee, over there somewhere, right? Really gets on my wick. So I started looking into other ways VR headsets were tracking, and that's what led me to, I think there was like the Rift S was coming out, or had come out at the time. And I saw the Quest, the original Quest. That thing was absolutely fantastic. Inside out tracking, headset tracked controllers. So your play space would literally be, yeah, that's going to be here, and button, done. You're good to go. And as long as your controllers were roughly in the place of your headset, you could do. There was some things that didn't track quite properly, but it didn't matter which way you turned, you were still being tracked, right? You could be jumping around, spinning on the spot, backflipping, whatever. Your controls would still track, and that was absolutely brilliant. Until I wanted full body tracked VR. It's weird, because if there's one thing that really makes VR like really pop, is being able to see your legs move. Your hands, that's a given, right? But your legs, when you actually sit down in a chair and you see your body actually track, and you wiggle your legs and you can see your feet go, there's something about that that causes a wonderful connection. But again, base station tracked. If anything isn't seen, your tracking goes in the bin, and that really breaks immersion. I have a lot of trouble with VR, as much as I love it. Anytime my tracking breaks, my immersion just goes straight through the floor. I could be having the greatest time in the world, and as soon as there's a single blip in my tracking, it's gone. It's completely gone. Immersion is completely through the floor for me. And so I spoke to a bunch of my mates about kind of VR and all that kind of stuff. What was it they wanted out of VR? And nearly everyone I spoke to was like, I want to get into VR, but it's too expensive. It's way too expensive. I eventually want to go the full body tracking route. and it's too expensive. So what do you mean it's too expensive? Well, I want to get a Valve Index. Okay, understandable. Valve Index is a beautiful headset. Fantastic headset. A lot of people didn't want a Quest because they didn't want to have a... So Quest and Quest 2 eventually got this requirement to have a Facebook account. At the time, a Facebook account. You started with an Oculus account. Then when the Quest 2 came out, you needed a Facebook account. And people just didn't want to do that, which is weird considering you're happy to have a Netflix account and a YouTube account and all that kind of stuff. But irrelevant, because I get it. You don't want to put your name and your face on Facebook and all that kind of stuff just to use your VR. So a lot of people are like, I must have the Index. If you're a Linux user, you only really had two options out of the box, and that was the HTC Vive and the Valve Index, because they were the only two that worked by default on Linux. But they wanted the Index for base station tracked full body VR, and I was like, you do know you don't have to spend £1,000 on a headset to get into VR. Well, what do you mean? And by this time, I must have been on like my 6th headset, something like that. I think I've got about 8 VR headsets. When I got into VR, I got into VR hard. Like, really hard. And I tried stuff from all kinds of different vendors, right? I went with the CV1, the Quest 1, the Quest 2, I went with Vive Cosmos, Windows Mixed Reality headsets. I tried a bunch of them, right? I was like, stop paying attention to what these VR YouTubers are saying. You don't need the highest resolution headset out there to enjoy VR. You just don't. It's one of those silly ideas that a lot of people get into their head. Like, I'm not going to learn to drive until I get a Bugatti. Put that straight in the bin. That's just not how it works. To me, that is the equivalent in VR. The Valve Index is like, it's really comfortable, nice screens, nice sound, great microphone, tracking is fantastic on it. It's base station tracked, but it's base station 2, so you can have 4 base stations in your house, but you have to pay for 2 of those extra base stations to get that kind of thing. I would love 4, which is what I'm getting at, right? But you don't need to dump $1,000 on this high-end headset. There are higher end, okay? So the Quest is technically a higher end headset, but they didn't want Facebook and they wanted full body tracking. There is full body tracking for the Quest. I will admit to that. There's actually a lot of different full body setups for the Quest now, but my recommendation has always been, depending on what you want to do, near enough any headset will do the job. Okay, if you just want to have your arms and your head and wail about in VR, any headset will do the job. Any headset will do the job. A CV1, a Quest 2, a Pico 4, a Valve Index, a Reverb G2. Is that the HP Reverb G2? Is that the one, the super high res screens, or like a Pimax? Like, all of them will do that job. Okay? When it comes to full body tracking, there are options for a lot of other headsets, but the easiest one to get into has always been Vive trackers. Okay? Always. It's always been the easiest way to get into FBT. You just need a base station tracked headset. So there you go, you've knocked off the Quest and all that. There are ways to do it with the Quest, but you have to pay extra for base stations and stuff. Get a base station tracked headset, Vive, Index, Vive Pro 2, whatever, any headset that comes with base stations, and then buy Vive trackers, Tundra trackers, whatever. Okay? Vive trackers, when Tundra trackers came out, and I have a set, right? it's really stupid, right? Everyone wanted Tundra trackers because I don't know why. Look how small they are. They're not that much smaller than Vive Tracker 3s, by the way. So stop. You could have just bought Vive Tracker, because the Vive trackers were always on sale. All of these other pieces would sell out. All the Quest stuff sells out in a heartbeat. And it's not because it's the best, it's just because you can't. There's small companies manufacturing this stuff, and it's really hard to get hold of. Once it sells out, you could be waiting for ages. So I kept on saying to my friends, right, just pick a cheap headset. Any headset will do the job. Grab yourself, if you want to go full body tracking, grab an HTC Vive and Vive trackers. Right? Vive. Gen 1 Vive, fuck the Index, get a Vive. But why Vive, man? Look, why? It's like, look, it's plenty good enough. And for 200 quid, you can get a headset, you can get base stations, you know, and then for a couple $100 more, maybe $300 more-ish, you can buy yourself Vive trackers right now from Amazon, Scan, wherever. You don't have to wait for Tundra trackers to come in. You can just buy them and biggity bam, 500 quid, half of the price of the Index. You're in full body tracked VR. All of the other VR YouTubers out there will be telling you, all the VR content creators will be telling you, check out this new headset, check out this new headset. Higher resolution, higher this, higher that. Spoiler alert, higher resolution doesn't change how shit looks. What? What do you mean? VR looks like shit, for the most part. VR is very young, and it's in the Atari days. No one quite knows how to make things work yet, so we're just throwing everything at the wall, and we're seeing what sticks. Having a higher resolution headset isn't going to make your sucky game look better. Your best bet with a high resolution headset is that you might find it a little bit easier to read. Okay? You do not need a higher resolution headset. If the game looks like it came off of a PlayStation 3 on an Index or on a Vive, it will look exactly the same on the newest, highest end headset on the market. It just will. Don't listen to the fluff that you hear from VR content creators. But it looks so real. No, it doesn't. And it doesn't feel any different either. In fact, the only content creator I like that has done anything about VR in recent history, I do like some other VR content creators, but one dude, honest as fuck, 2 Clicks Philip. He's not traditionally a VR content creator, but he's a fan of VR. And he put up a video, maybe I like him because he agrees with me, but he puts up a video where he's got a Valve Index and he goes out and he buys a cheap VR headset. It's like a Lenovo Explorer Windows mixed reality thing. And the gist of it was, you know, you want to play Half-Life Alyx, but it'll cost you a fortune because you want to buy an Index, but you have to have a PC powerful enough to run an Index, you have to spend £1,000 on an Index, you have to do this, you have to do that, and whatever. Lenovo Explorer, you can buy them cheap as chips on eBay, a couple $100, and it's all headset tracked. He said, so what's the real difference? Well, the game doesn't change. Right? The control scheme changes a little bit, and in some cases he gave positives and negatives between the two. And he said, you know what? I'm getting the same experience in the game with less comfort, but at a fraction of the price. And it's all down to what part you value. He said, because the experience was exactly the same. It was the same. I was getting the same experience for a fraction of the price. Right? He said probably the worst part about it was the comfort of it. You don't need an expensive headset to get into VR, despite what VR content creators will tell you. Every week there's a new video. New headsets coming. New headsets coming. New headsets coming. You don't need them. So, what was the issue you had yesterday? Base station tracked full body. All of a sudden, one of my trackers just stopped working. Whether or not it could be seen by the base stations in the corner of my room, like in the corners of my room, or whatever, just all of a sudden my avatar was kind of SpongeBobbing it, and my back was breaking, and half of me was going that way, my arms were going this way, my hands were still being perfectly tracked, you know, my feet were being perfectly tracked, but my waist went somewhere over there, right? It was terrible. It was miserable, and no amount of fiddling with my base stations would sort it. Now, this is the limitation of buying a Gen 1 base station tracked headset. Vive only supports 2 base station 1s. So as I said with the original CV1 I had, if I turned around in a certain way, I would block one of the sensors off. So I couldn't be seen. So tracking would go right in the bin. Which is weird, because the CV1 would allow you to actually use more trackers. You could use 3 if you wanted. You could use 3 of the little base station things on the CV1, but then full body tracking would mean that you had to have play spaces like bonded together, and because they use Oculus and Vive used two different methods to track base stations and place base locations. So you'd have to set it up on the Oculus, set it up on the and then just mush them together, and then it would work. But I can only get two base stations, right? I have 4 base stations for 1.0, but I can only use 2. Silly. That's where the Index comes in. Index, or any base station 2 tracked headset, which will be Vive Pro, Vive Pro 2, Index, Cosmos Elite, or Cosmos with Elite faceplate or whatever. Some of those headsets don't come with base station 2s, they come with base station 1s. So then you have to pay the extra money to get base station 2s. But then you could have multiple trackers about, or multiple base stations about, so that you can be seen all around the room. And I was like, frankly, you know what? I think the way forward these days is the Quest. It's just the Quest. I've always told people, it doesn't matter what Quest you've got, whether it be Quest 1 or Quest 2, if you're hooking it up to your PC, makes no difference. Your Quest 1, Quest 2, no different than a Valve Index. I mean, the reason I recommend the Vive to people is because parts of it are interchangeable with the Index. You know those knuckle controllers you can get? They work with the Vive. So for the price of the Vive, the knuckles controllers, and full body tracking, you're still paying less than an Index. But, sorry, going back to the thing. Anything that's hooked up to your PC, it really doesn't make any difference. Just maybe the control methods will be different, and how you do full body tracking is going to be different. These standalone headsets like the Quest, Quest 2, Pico, they use sensor-based tracking, not base station tracking. And by sensor tracking, I mean like you'll have accelerometers and things on a little puck that you put on yourself, and they can drift and stuff over time, so you'll have to recalibrate after a certain amount of time, but there is no occlusion, there is no things being covered up, right? So if a lot of people like to sleep in VR, right? And they like to wear their full body tracking and stuff, but as soon as you whap like a blanket over the top of your Vive trackers or your Tundra trackers, the sensors are being covered up. So all of a sudden your legs break off and go in opposite directions and you can't be seen. Kind of like if you're out of sight of your base station, like what I was having the other night. All of a sudden my waist was just going somewhere else, and it just kind of breaks the immersion. But these sensor-based trackers don't do that, right? They just don't, because they're based on the information that they are gathering from the devices that you're wearing and the little server that you're running on your computer. So you don't have occlusion issues. You can spin around, backflip, all sorts of stuff, and it's just not going to give a shite, right? And the tracking's pretty solid. But again, the only 2 real big trackers out there, Tundras and Vive trackers, and their base station. You've got, for Quest, Slime, and is it the, I can't even pronounce it, it's like the Haratora X or whatever, the Hator X. It's a belt with a bunch of sensors on it, right? It's like a chest strap and a belt and all that. And you run a server on it just like you do Slime, and it will, you know, connect up to the server and translate all the sensor calls into stuff for your PC to do, and then your avatar does the same thing, right? But those are being made by, I'm not going to say Joe Public, but some very passionate engineers. They're made by people like me, people like you, who want the technology to move forwards. They don't have access to huge production facilities and big pools of cash, so they can only build as many as they can build on like their weekend off from work or whatever, you know what I mean? They don't have a crew, they don't have a staff, they just have to build them and then ship them out. If you want Slimes, if you order them now, you ain't getting them until April. If you want the belt, the X, you can't get that thing unless you live in the States. So that's straight out in the bin. Full body tracking on the Quest and that is just like a nightmare to get. But I feel that's going to be the way forwards, because I am sick and tired of base stations. Man, they are great. Tracking's great when it works. If you've got a headset that allows you to do 3 base stations or 4 base stations, you'll be in heaven forever and you'll never need to change. But if you're stuck like I am with base station 1s, or you don't have any at all, the best option is going to be a Quest 2, and one of these sensor-based things. Even Sony are getting into the sensor-based tracker market. I don't know when they're coming out, I can't remember what they're called, but they're just these little discs that they're going to you put them on a thing, like like the Apple tags or something. They're gonna be like smaller than this, and you just literally boop, and they're gonna come with straps. And you just put them on, you charge them up, you put them on, run a server on your computer, and you're good to go. You're off to the races. The standalone headsets are they are the way. They are the way. That's the fastest growing market out there. For all these people dogging on the Quest and the Quest 2, it's stupid. It's really stupid. It's like one of the most popular headsets on the market, and it's only getting better as time goes by. Right? It's what, $400? You used to be getting for $300 to $400 now. Great screens, nice and comfortable, decent support. Facebook's own software, Meta's own software for Airlink and Oculus Link is shite. Virtual Desktop is decent though. That is the way to go for PC VR on Quest. There's a lot of products only being released for the Quest though in the States. So if you live in the States, you've got a bucket of really cool stuff you can do. You've got full body tracking, almost readily available. You've got wireless earbuds being made. You've got a one-click solution, plug and play, wireless VR solution. If you're in the States, it's a D-Link wireless dongle. These wireless headsets are the way to go. It's the only thing I can think of to recommend to people these days if they're willing to wait, if they want to get into full body tracking. Because base station's bollocks. If you're that sensitive to your emotion being broken like I am, not ideal. I'll take low resolution screens. You know, a PS3 game on a 4K screen is still going to look like a PS3 game. Okay? The game doesn't change based on the resolution. The gameplay isn't going to get any better based on the resolution. So all these newer headsets are nothing. Having solid tracking though, that's a pretty big groove. But there aren't that many headsets that come with base station 2 trackers which allow you to use more than 2. If it's a headset that comes with base station 1s, ignore it. Just ignore it. I think actually the Cosmos Elite still only comes with base station 1s. Vive Pro 2 is base station 2, I think. Just sadly, my Vive isn't compatible with base station 2s. I can use other hardware from base station 2 headsets, but I can't use base station 2s. I could get an Index and run it on this setup, from what I understand. That'd be neat. I would like an Index, I'm not saying I wouldn't. VR doesn't have to be as expensive as content creators out there want you to think it is, right? You can do it on a cheap PC, or you can go standalone. You can buy a cheap headset and get just as much joy out of VR as the higher end users. In fact, if I think about it, most of my friends took my advice and went with Vives or Quest 2s. And I still have a Quest 1 by my feet, in a box, and a CV1 by my feet. If I was given the option of any of these headsets or nothing, I wouldn't care which one you gave me. But full body tracking though, I think the future is going to have to be base stationless tracking. Just for the fact that there's no occlusion. It really broke my immersion last night when my trackers stopped working. I ended up just turning them all off partway through the playthrough. Just so annoying. But I'm gonna head off. Sorry, I just had to go off on this rant because I've been recommending people this stuff for years now, and my base recommendation has slipped. Unless people are willing. Finally, it's got to the point where it's too long in the tooth. Unless people are willing to put up with occlusion to base stations, the occasions where a tracker is going to flip out. Even with the base stationless full body tracking, it will freak out from time to time, but I just imagine it'll be easier to set up than regular FBT, and the idea that you're not going to have to stay in the exact same place and it'll be easier to move about and you can just put it on, pull out your bag, put it on and job done. Just, to me, that's a better solution, and that's what I'm going to recommend these days. Standalone headset and the sensor-based full-body tracking when and if you can get them. The only reason I don't recommend them completely, or haven't completely recommended them in the past, is just because of the lead-in times for it. You buy in April, you'll get in November. You know, or you buy beginning of the year, you'll get it by the end of the year, and that just, you know, that's a bit. It's a bit, because that's a long time, and a big company could swoop in and release something newer and better. like I say, if you want VR, just pick a headset. Doesn't have to be the most expensive. Fingers crossed, I'll see you in VR. Tell me what you picked and why you picked it, and if you're having a good time. Plus, I think most VR content creators spend most of their time in VR chat. They just do. They're not playing half the games that they're selling to you. They're in VR chat. No two ways about it. Mate, this is the greatest game ever. You haven't played as much of that as you're telling people you have. You've been in VR chat. Greatest game ever, buy this. That you don't play after you've made the video of it. I'll see you on the next one. Sorry. Rant. Completely do breed.